It's one of my early things that I do when I walk on to a new role is to understand, where the criticalities are, right? And how many sites do we have? And what are we prepared to do? Can I pull this Ethernet cable out if I really need to? And then what is that runway? So really kind of starting to give legs to that incident response plan. And you really have to include the controls engineers and the folks from operations and maintenance understand the full picture, Yeah, that's very powerful.
You're listening to Protect It All, where Aaron Crow expands the conversation beyond just OT, delving into the interconnected worlds of IT and OT cybersecurity. Get ready for essential strategies and insights. Here's your host, Aaron Crow.
Thank you for joining me on another episode of Protect It All podcast, where I get to talk to people that I've worked with and people that I get to call friends. And Clark is both of those things. So Clark and I have worked together for quite a number of years, as well as I'm very fortunate to call Clark a friend. So Clark, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little about yourself and a little bit about your background.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me. So obviously my name is Clark and really got into the cybersecurity realm in the NERC CIP era, So if you think about where all of us kind of came from in cybersecurity, unlike today where people are just coming in from cybersecurity as an education, I'm a little too old for that. So networking in the power and energy space, utilities, getting into the regulatory side, then NERC CIP drafting committee, and it all went so fast from there. So 18 years in power and energy, and then really just enjoying the dynamics and what I'm seeing in all these different areas. Of course, getting opportunities to work in manufacturing, tape manufacturing, food and beverage, really expanded my views from a NERC CIP myopic view in terms of demonstrating compliance versus, boy, you're really short on budget. Here's what you can do. And
Right.
Trying to find, what moves the risk meter just a little tad to the right direction. So that's really kind of my background. Power and energy, tape manufacturing, food and bev, and other industries like that.
Yeah. And, we talk about this a lot on the podcast with different folks that I'm interviewing and having conversations with. But, OT is OT, right? Yes, a power plant's a little bit different than manufacturing. It's a little bit different. Like, obviously, the technology is different. The business process is different. But ultimately, they are very similar in so many ways. And you hit on that really important thing there is the budget is so vastly different across some, right? And NERC CIP, like, as we know, one of the reasons why NERC CIP and the power industry is a little bit maybe further, quote unquote, further ahead than some of these other verticals is because they don't have a choice, right? They have to do this or there's fines and, compliance issues that come from that. So they don't have a choice but to do it. Whereas, wastewater and some of these others, manufacturing, if I'm not critical manufacturing, then I don't, even if I am, there's limited amounts of things that I have to do. So they don't have the same budget cycles and focus, or at least they haven't in the past. I think I see a trend where it's going in the right direction, where more and more folks are like, hey, we don't have a choice. We have to do this because it's going to impact my bottom line. It's a risk. More and more of the boards and C-suite are starting to understand that this is a risk to their business. It's not just a cyber thing. It's not just a cost center. It's not just some nerds like me and you that are wanting to put in new firewalls because firewalls are cool, because I absolutely think firewalls are cool, but there's a reason behind it, not just because I want to, right?
Right. And think about what NERC CIP did. Once those fines started rolling out, once those regulatory requirements became enforceable, it created that cottage industry. And I feel like it was a good bump in the cyber side where we're getting better tools that fit really the OT side of the house.
Yeah, I see more and more verticals using NERC CIP and these other, use cases, and not that they're trying to say, hey, we're going to implement NERC CIP and, power utility or in wastewater, but they're using a lot lot of the framework, right? And that's, you and I coming from consulting backgrounds, a lot of times we're using these different frameworks, whether it's NIST CSF or it's 62443 or, whatever the framework is. So many people are like, well, I think you should use this framework and I think you should use this framework. And I think I've always felt like I don't care what framework you use, because all the framework is the language that we're using to be able to communicate what we're trying to do and what the goals are, right? And once we have that framework is just the dictionary of this is what we call incident, this is what we call endpoint and asset and all of those terms. And then you build a program around those things for you. It's not like you just take NIST off the shelf and there's your program, Duke Energy or Coca-Cola. Like, no, they have to personalize that for their environment and what is important to them and their business. And that's where it doesn't matter which framework you use. There's no right answer. There's probably a wrong answer, but I don't think there's a right answer.
But the frameworks are so powerful in that, once they choose that framework, I know people say compliance is compliance and then we need to do the real cyber work. But for a lot of these electric utilities at that time, this was very, very new for them. And the journey that the regulatory side was going to take them on, I feel like as they built up those foundational cybersecurity controls just for the compliance aspect, they then got to see, oh, hey, look what this is showing me. And as they oriented towards their environment, how they're set up for their specific equipment, then they're able to make more than just the regulatory aspect of cybersecurity.
Yeah. And to your point, right? Compliance doesn't always equal security, right? They can be two different goals. And we see this in NERC CIP and Power Utility a lot is I can be 100% compliant and still have risk in my environment because I'm never quote unquote secure. The biggest problem I see with the NERC CIP side is because of the scope, right?
Yes.
So the scope of NERC CIP doesn't include all the assets at a site or at a company, right? It's just a subset of that, right? So it's not that the compliance doesn't work. It's that I'm only implementing the NERC CIP compliance stuff for the things that I have to because there's an audit factor on those. So I don't want to go have these other assets. So if I have 10 assets and only 7 of them are part of the NERC CIP program, I'm only including those 7 in my program. Even if I do the same actions on those other 3, which is what you should do, but many don't even do that and they're not tracking it. So they only do it on those 7 and they leave those other 3 out in the cold. And they think, well, I've done it in NERC CIP, so I'm good, right? But what about those other 3? And as we know, a chain's only as strong as its weakest link. And those are the places where they're going to get in. You look at Colonial Pipeline, you look at a lot of these target attacks and things, not necessarily just OT, but a lot of these spaces come from, some supplier's VPN that has a backdoor, or they're getting into an HR system that's not technically OT, right? They're getting into these ancillary or tangential systems that can also cause downstream effects, and they're impacting these things because they're not part of the program. And I'm not doing the same level of rigor on those items that I am on the rest of the things that are my family jewels or the crown jewels of the environment, right?
And they have the opportunity to, right? And, a lot of the things that we've learned since the beginnings of NERC CIP was that firewall rules are so different in the enterprise space and how IT runs things versus, how we operate the grid. That grid architecture is so set and, the equipment we use, protocols we use and everything. And so some of these utilities laid out dual firewalls because of the differences in how things are managed and operated. So you would have, like, on the enterprise side, the IT firewall, and then they would follow the mutual distrust model, and then on the OT side have their model. And so with that, then of course the operational technology side, they plan both, ports and services for normal operations and emergency operations. Whereas when they were merged as one, IT would go and do their annual firewall review. And how do they do that? They go and look at the traffic. Oh, look, this rule has not been hit. In 365 days, we're going to delete this rule to increase our performance so it doesn't, right?
Yep.
And you have to think about, well, okay, what happens if IT did that on an OT firewall and there was an event that happened and they had to use alternative or backup protocols destinations on the network, right? All that, they would have to go, why doesn't it work anymore?
Right. Yeah. And it's, diving into firewalls, right? And I've been a proponent of having a separate boundary firewall for OT, really segmenting OT off your IT environment in a physically segmented environment, right? And there's a lot of reasons behind that, right? It's the whole, security in depth idea of, I always assumed that my IT organization was captured, right? I assume that there's
Exactly.
bad thing. Right. You have
Exactly.
to, right? So I would put that there. We went as far in some of the sites where we would have, if corporate had vendor A, let's say they were Palo, then I'd put Fortinet or Cisco or some other vendor. It wasn't about that this firewall is better or worse. It's really just that it's different, right? So the same vulnerability that could hit the top one wouldn't be able to hit the second one because the OS is different. The vulnerabilities are different. And I could argue both sides of that coin because the bad side of that means is that now I have two different platforms and understandings and functionalities and skill sets that I have to have. So now I have to have Fortinet and Palo and Cisco or whatever those things are. And especially on the OT side, the other problem that I generally normally see is that we're under-skilled. And I don't necessarily mean that the people aren't smart because as we know, these people are extremely intelligent. That's not what I mean. I mean, they don't have enough hours in the day and they're working on keeping the plant running and making widgets. They don't have as much time and opportunity to just focus on firewall and cybersecurity and all that kind of stuff. So to your point, it gets pushed to the back burner, not because they don't care. It's just because their job, their boss, their bonus is all tied to functionality and operations of this site.
Right. And so if you bifurcate that responsibility and ownership, so each has their own firewalls, it's not just firewalls. It becomes the entire stack.
Mm-hmm.
And so the
Correct.
OT would then subsequently own their own Active Directory, et cetera, et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera.
Yep.
It's mutual distrust is a powerful pattern. If we go the other way and it's integrated, right? And so that IT OT firewall, that line is being managed by the IT side. There's a lot of definite policies that the OT people need to be a part of so that the operational sense of IT doesn't break any of the run conditions, normal or emergency or incident response, right? How many times do we really think about the ability to respond in OT? A lot of times we're going to, sever the connection with the mothership and try to keep operational as long as possible to shut things down safely or to finish a certain production run, even if there is ongoing attack. And I think that really rattles IT a bit because they're like, shut everything down, right?
And we know we can't do that in an OT space. And the analogy I always give is, hey, you're flying on an airplane and the airplane has a vulnerability on the control system, the avionics, and you're on the plane. Do you want them to patch and update that while you're 30,000 feet above the air with 300 people on the plane? I think not. Let's land the plane, get the people off the plane, and then we'll update it to make sure that it's safe.
Exactly.
It's a different level of risk when we're talking about real life, real world things happening. It's not my email server got booted and I lost a couple of sales. Even if a couple of sales means millions of dollars, we're talking about loss of human life. Like that's a completely different value and risk that we have in the OT space.
And when you mentioned we're so short-staffed, these engineers are working on several other things. Last thing you need to do is help someone change their password, right? They got locked out. Now you need to update a password. How many of those requests comes right through? And that's where I had the hope for AI, right? AI is going to be able to really enable us to do a lot more on the OT space than we've ever had to do,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that double-edged sword as we have with everything, right? Is going to make it so much more effective and efficient. Like I've literally this week, I have built 3 websites and I'm not a web designer by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not, right? But I've updated my podcast website. I've updated my personal website. I've built something for ICS Village and working with them because they needed a temporary thing. And I built all that stuff with AI. And I've done this in the past and it looked very 1984 block and, yeah, it was a site, but it was like hello world. There wasn't a lot to it. But man, now like you can use Perplexity computer and it ties into, what is that, Nana Banana or whatever. So it creates the images and it does the hero, the workflow. It's actually doing an SEO audit on it. It's saying, hey, the images are too big. It takes too long to load. Like you don't have the SEO tags in this. Like it is looking at all of these things, especially as somebody who is not a web developer. I wouldn't think like it looks good to me. Like I don't know that it's not great. And it's amazing in a few days how much faster, like how much, kind of hits that I've gotten on it. Imagine we take that to an OT space and we take away all those little menial tasks that we don't need them to do. The obvious thing that we have to make sure of in these spaces is how do we do it and not add unneeded risk? Because we are going to be bringing risk in when we do this. There's no doubt. Where is that line where we're comfortable with, right? Is it maybe, and we can also keep a human in the loop. Doesn't mean that you go Terminator and you just say, AI, run my plant. You may say, hey, AI, go do these things. And then I will confirm if it's right, if I agree, etc. I have that last level of submit kind of thing where it's not actually making changes. It's just saying, hey, these are changes that I should recommend. Or would you like me to do these things? This is what I'm going to do, and confirm all of those things. But think about how many times that we forget to back up a switch configuration, or we made a change and we didn't submit it, or we didn't, like any number of little menial things, because we're human and we've got 50 other things going on and we don't close the loop, or we change a password and we fat finger it, or because it's so difficult and I'm tired of changing the password, I set it for never to expire. Like I've never done that before ever in my life, ever as an admin. No, I've never done that.
Exactly. Those are great places to start. I especially love the way you mentioned the change management piece, right? Because change management is both on the operations maintenance side as well as on the cybersecurity side.
Yep.
Just imagine when we get to the point where we can bring AI along, and let's say we have a controls technician just finishes up a break fix and is able to utilize AI to, since it's a break fix, that means no change to get even started on it, but just to have AI kick it off, document everything he did, then update the drawing, update the diagrams, and put that note in, close it out for the weekend report.
Dude, that is so huge. How many plants have I gone to and I asked for documentation and I get the as-built documentation from 1982 with maybe some red lines on it, but they haven't updated documentation in years. Like sometimes, and I'm not exaggerating, decades, they have not updated drawings. Like it's all in the system. It's all in Bob's head, or it's in Sally's head, right? It's not actually documented anywhere. Or maybe it's documented in 50 different places and Bob knows where his stuff is and Sally knows where her stuff is, etc. But there is not one place that if I came in, if Bob and Sally won the lottery and left the company, that Aaron could come in and find and put all that stuff together, because I don't have the history of all the things that they've done over the 30 or 40 years they've been with the company many times, right?
I found a substation drawing and, you're right. It's decades old, but all the pencil, all the pen, all those little notations, when you put it all together, was up to date, just like that. But you had to know which substation to go to find that drawing.
Correct.
And what happens if they make a fix and they don't go back and remember to jot that down? But it seems like when I see those things, it looks like the drawing was used as like a general notepad for when like a substation technician and a protection engineer kind of leaves notes for each other.
Yeah.
This is what I last touched.
Well, even again, I'm not coder. I've never been I can write scripts and I know some programming languages, but I have never been a developer by any stretch. Yes, I was a CTO, but I didn't actually do the code. I knew what I wanted to, I focused on the outcome, the needs of the business and the needs of the customer more so than I was, this is how you program that thing. I left that to the engineers, right? Again, it's not because I couldn't sit down and do something. Sure, I could, but you don't want me doing that. It's just like the same reason why you don't want me actually configuring your firewall. Like, can I configure firewalls? I've configured thousands of them. But if you're wanting me to do that, that's probably not the best use of my time or your money, because I'm not going to be as effective as somebody that's all they do every day, right? So it's insane. As I'm building these sites using AI, I'm publishing it in GitHub, a private thing for GitHub, right? But AI is self-documenting. So all the things that I'm asking it to do, it's automatically every change. So I can go back because I suck at this. I have 30 freaking commits or 50 commits or 100 commits to build this site out because, I don't like this. I don't like that. But every time it does a commit and a change, it's documenting what was included in that change. Why was this commit done? So if anything I wanted to do, and this is just a stupid website that is just my personal one, right? Imagine if we had that level of rigor. And the main reason we don't do that today, we already hit. Like those people, they don't have the time to document all that stuff if they don't have to. And it's not because they don't see value in it. It's like they have 5 minutes and then they got to go on to the next thing. And there's an alarm screaming and 15 people are asking them to do things. They don't have time to sit down and document things for an hour for every change they made. They'd never do anything else.
Yeah, I love where you went to with, just do we want Aaron to be configuring this firewall? Do we want really the person? You can tell historic firewall rules, who's wrote which rules, right? If you had AI go in and apply those standards and clean up those object names and really standardize that method, those firewalls would become much easier to read, much more efficient in terms of having the most used rules at the top and things like that. I just feel like there's so much opportunity, and not only in the firewall area, but also, like we mentioned, change management. And why is all this stuff so new to us in terms of AI has been around in cybersecurity for 10, 15 years, maybe even longer, right? And so we finally figured out really kind of how to start to enable this for the masses and not just keep these AI tools for the researchers and the PhDs and the things like that, where now AI is usable by people like us. That's the huge part.
Yeah, 100%. And it's getting to a place where the value is there, right? So as you were talking about this, the thing I was thinking, there's a show called The Pit. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a doctor show and it's based on an emergency room in Pittsburgh. And it's kind of like that old show 24, where each season was one day. For The Pit, each season is one shift. So it's a 12-hour shift. So it's 12 one-hour episodes. So it's basically one shift of an emergency, like a super very busy, chaotic emergency room day. And this season, not to ruin it, if you guys want to go watch it, you may want to, put your ears in because I am going to spoil it if you haven't seen it. But they go into, there's a cyber attack hitting the hospital. So it's a large hospital chain or whatever, and they have multiple locations. Well, a couple of their other locations were hit with ransomware, which shut down their system. So IT decided they were going to just go ahead and shut down all of the computer systems at this hospital on a 4th of July weekend so that everybody at the site, none of the charts, you couldn't order anything, nothing was digital. The screens didn't work anymore. And there was a few doctors that had been there a long time. And there was a few nurses that had been there a long time and were there long enough. They had to bring in people, nurses they had laid off or had retired or whatever, that remembered how to do manual charts for every person. How do I get meds? How do I order, x-rays? How do I order MRIs when everything is manual? And they literally had to have physical runners, people that would take these orders and run to the pharmacy and run to the x-ray machine and run to the whatever. But it shut down everything because 90% of the people there, most of them were, 30 years old or younger and had always done everything with technology. But this is a prime use case of an OT environment where they shut the computers down because they were trying to stop ransomware, but it had a giant impact. Now, granted that it's a TV show and obviously it's a little over the top, but still the use case is real. And that's what we're dealing with in OT. Ransomware, if it were able to get down to that level, you're literally talking about people's lives. And how do you continue to run if you don't have all of the systems that you've built? It's why in nuclear environments, we have triple redundant systems and the last system is analog and all those types, because they don't ever want that to be a problem.
Right. And for folks who don't practice it on a regular basis, they're going to really be in that fire drill. And hopefully they still have folks who understand how to do things manually.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Right. And it's such an archaic skill. Imagine if the power plant went down. Now, granted, the power plant is a little different because all of those, in theory, they have those operators that know how to do those things. But, there's also that whole big concern with we're losing all of our experience and all the folks that have been there for 40 years, they're retiring. Right. So, and then as you hire these new folks, they may or may not have the ability to do the same things or have the knowledge and know where the bodies are hidden. And, how do I start this plant up without just going to the control center and hitting start on the thing? There's also a manual way to do all those things, because all the things that the control system is doing, you could actually do by going and turning the valve and putting it in the right place and doing it from different environments. But you have to know how to do those things. And that's not something you necessarily always train everyone on. Maybe you do in critical infrastructure, but at your, food and beverage site, maybe not. Like maybe that's not something they thought about. How to that disaster recovery or incident response plan is not part of their, how do I start this thing up if all this stuff goes away?
Exactly. And I'll tell you, it's one of my early things that I do when I walk on to a new role is to understand, where the criticalities are, right? And how many sites do we have? And what are we prepared to do? Can I pull this Ethernet cable out if I really need to? And then what is that runway? So really kind of starting to give legs to that incident response plan. And you really have to include the controls engineers and the folks from operations and maintenance understand the full picture, Yeah, that's very powerful.
It's, again, I could be on both sides of the AI thing. And I generally do think that AI is going to bring more good than bad. Honestly, I think it's because of all the changes that are happening, which there's a bunch of stuff going on right now with Anthropic and them being able to see vulnerabilities in software. And they're finding they have this new thing they've worked with a bunch of very large companies that have found, vulnerabilities in software, type A vulnerabilities very quickly using AI, which really just opens the kimono to all of the technical debt that we have in every product in the world. It really makes it scary. Now, on the flip side of that, it can also help it's like I see both sides and oh my gosh, it's going to crash everything. But on the flip side, it's not like it's creating those vulnerabilities. Those vulnerabilities already existed. We just didn't know about them yet, right? Which is every 0 day. Every 0 day was already a vulnerability we just didn't know existed until somebody found it and exploited it. And now it's a 0 day and now we have to patch it, right? So on the flip side, if we can take a product like an AI that can actually look at things and say, hey, by the way, here's all the holes. What are you going to do about it? It doesn't mean you have to go patch. It doesn't mean you have to fix the software. There's multiple layers of protection that you can do, whether it's firewall, whether it's patching, whether it's disabling RDP or whatever the vulnerabilities are to protect your environment. But isn't it better to know it than not?
And think about it from yet the other side, the engineers who want to employ AI into a line, and when they begin to think about what do I need to do for automation equipment to allow AI to, of course, first of all, human in the loop. And then in far future, maybe closer than I think it is, when can I allow it to optimize my line? And what do I need to do? What are all the thresholds for all the set points? Where do I now table safety at? And using that combination as really how I'm hoping the controls engineers would look at adoption of AI, because then on the cybersecurity side, I can say, okay, I'm counting on these thresholds to now exist when they may have been sort of there, sort of not there. And now being able to narrow down that bad behavior detection with our tools to make sure that our engineers are using AI safely in OT.
Right. Yeah. And it's coming, right? We are not going to be able, it's no different than we've seen everybody use Netgear routers or D-Link or whatever in OT, right? They're going to find a way. They're going to use it. So it's that, it's kind of like I always say the preacher's kid, right? The preacher's kid sometimes is the one that goes off the deep end when they go to college or when they're on their own because they never had any freedom or flexibility. It was always just, no, everything's offline. But as soon as they get any flexibility or freedom or find a way, they go crazy, right? And that's what our OT, our operations folks, and people in general, those engineer minds, they're going to find a way. Like, hey, this could really help us But they keep telling me, no, I'm just going to go over here and do it on my own without asking their permission and find a way. And that's where it can be dangerous because they're not using it. They don't understand what they don't like. They don't know what they don't know, and they don't know the risks that they're necessarily bringing in. So it's going to be an interesting time to see how people, especially in OT, how companies deal with that, right? And yeah, you can restrict it. Yeah, you can push policies down. But we also know in the OT space, it's like this big black wall of, I don't know all the things that are going on behind it. So my IT tools are not going to necessarily be able to block everything. We know they have their own wireless. They have their own internet services as well. They're bypassing corporate everything all the time. We see it all the time. So you can't just be in your ivory tower and think that you're going to be able to block it. You need to be thinking and having conversations and finding ways because they're going to want to use it and it's going to be a differentiation. And on the flip side of that, I absolutely think the organizations that do it and do it well will surpass their competition, right? They will be more efficient. They will be more effective. They will be able to do things that people that are just saying no and just restricting it are not going to have the same capabilities as those that are embracing AI and using it to their advantage.
Agree. As fast as the organization adopts AI, the cybersecurity folks need to adopt AI just as fast.
Correct.
As they explode there, you're not going to have the time to really analyze and understand, all the things that you need to protect their adoption of this technology. You really have to employ the same technology to help you get your arms around that.
Yeah, 100%. What do you see as the biggest gotchas for organizations that are wanting to try to use it? Obviously, we're talking a lot in OT, but I see it being the same and even in their IT spaces. But how do you think it's going to be the best kind of implemented and protected in these corporations? How are they going to do it successfully?
A lot of folks are looking to ring fence in what AI can do and where AI can connect to. You're always worried about that calling home aspect, right? Because all of a sudden, when you put in so much of your IP into these big engines, you're always worried that it's going to get used as part of the training on the next version. And all of a sudden, all of your IP becomes public. So really, it's to kind of ring fence that data in. And if you look at how you're talking about people always find a way, that's where the other side is going to be. Every time that you have an engineer that wants to use the latest AI tool, but it hasn't been cleared to enterprise yet. And they may not always do the research on what happens to all the data I put in this
Right.
tool.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're going to have this barrage of not only trying to ring fence your own folks in, but also looking at the publicly available AI engines and seeing if you can get to cough up your own IP. And I'm not even sure how you can get that back, right?
No, I don't think you can, right? And that's the flip side of this for those, because we have all sorts of folks that listen to this podcast, everybody from, cybersecurity professionals to my kids, my mother-in-law, people that just are interested in the cyber topic. So, let's say that you are just Joe Blow on the street. Like, what does this mean to you? Everybody, if you haven't, look at, OpenClaw, and there's all of these really cool AI things that you can do, but you have to be really careful what you do with them. And what I mean by that is like a lot of these things have the ability to log into your email. They have the ability to log into and take actions on behalf of you and make your life and take tasks and respond to emails and social media or whatever those things are. But think about that, right? Would you give me your password to your email? Would you give me your password to your phone? Like, you don't know me that well. Do you trust me? Like, how do you know that I'm not going to do something malicious, even if accidentally? Like, maybe I'm not intentionally doing it, but that's the thing that we need to be thinking about. Just because you can, and we're on the bleeding edge of a lot of these things, and things are happening so fast. And, I see OpenClaw everywhere. Everybody's using it, consultants and contractors and small businesses and soccer moms. Like, ooh, I can do this and it can do this. And like, yes, it can. But, you really need to have really good cyber posture and foundational things. Like I'm sure that not everybody has the same level of segmentation in their home network as I do. They probably don't have the level of firewalls that I do. They probably don't have a 27 character password unique for every single account I have. I don't have to use the same password anywhere. I have, multi-factor authentication and everything. I've got YubiKeys. Like, obviously I do this for a living, and all of my kids and even my wife uses all this stuff because I I forced them to. But I walk into so many places and that's just not the case, where they don't have that because they don't know why they need it. It's hard, it's difficult, or at least they think it is. So they just continue like my parents, they're not following this. Your parents are probably not as rigorous, and your brother, your sister, your grandmother, like whoever those people are to you, they probably don't have the same level of thought, because again, I do this because I do it for a living. My grandmother, my mother, my stepsister, whatever, they don't have the same, it's not in their daily life. They're not reading it. They're not podcasting about it. They're not eat, breathe, and sleep this stuff like I do and you do and others like us do, right?
Yes. And think when you enable the bad actor with AI, right? So just like how Claude is able to identify all these vulnerabilities in code, bad actors are going to be able to take advantage of these faster. They're going to be able to examine different levels of attacks faster. All the things that they were iteratively testing can now then be done in AI on their behalf. Yeah, it goes both directions, and having to defend against that is just going to be a nightmare.
Mm-hmm. And again, that's where the irony is AI can help us defend against that. If we train it the right way and we're using it in the right way, it can actually help us by finding the vulnerabilities, by helping us plug those things, by documenting things. It's almost like more so it's not about if, it's about when, right? It's not a matter of are you going to get hit? It's like, what are you going to do when it does happen, right? How are you going to respond? How are you going to recover? We've seen airports go down in Europe. We've seen train systems go down. We've seen power plants, all that's going on in Ukraine and Gaza and all the different war zone places where we see cyber as more and more hit, right? And more of an everyday thing. There's CISA and FBI and DHS releases all the time about critical infrastructure in the US because of Iran or because of China or North Korea or whatever the thing is. So the things are happening, but I also feel it's like that, you watch the evening news and, somebody was mugged or their car got broken into or whatever, but that's across the highway or that's in the other side of the city until it happens to you or it happens to your next door neighbor, right? And then it's a different thing of, wait, that happened, like my next door neighbor got broken into? Well, if he could get broken into, that means I could get broken into. Like it changes your perspective. But unfortunately, a lot of times in cyber and a lot of these types of things don't change until you really see value or you actually think it's a real possibility. Bad things have to happen before I take drastic responses or actions sometimes.
Agreed. I'm still looking forward to the productivity benefits that AI is promising. I think it will really help in terms of really the cybersecurity hygiene, right? The everyday stuff, making sure all the things boil up to the top. Oh, hey, these access reviews need to happen for these particular servers just because they're higher level criticality compared to maybe some of the other ones, helping us prioritize to really mitigate the highest risk. I always had that hope that it will help us direct us faster to where we want to go or where we need to go instead of, always just following those processes and, dotting I's, crossing T's. Let's look for the I's and T's that matter the most. Get those done first.
Yeah. I always say that using AI is going to be, take your junior level, your intern, if you were going to assign them tasks, that's what you should be assigning AI to do, right? It shouldn't be, running the nuclear reactor. It should be filing the TPS report, right? It should be something that you could train a monkey to do, that you can make it very easy. You can document the process. That's where you start. And then you start being more and more advanced and capable, and you add on and you have it do more and more and more things, and you add human in the loop, and you have it, okay, now you've done this, now take the next step. Okay, now you've done that, now take the next step. Like you start small, you start basic so that the impact is low. I'm not giving it NERC CIP assets. I'm not having it, shut the plant down or start it up, but I am, you talked about it before, change management. I'm documenting my changes automatically. The things that I'm currently doing with scripts, I can do AI to help me update those scripts and enhance those scripts and document those scripts and clean things up. There's so many really things like that we can do to make our people more effective. Like I don't see it, and I know, yes, it's probably going to happen. I don't see it as much displacing people as far as, hey, I don't need an engineer at a site anymore. I just see it as that engineer has more capability and can be more effective, right? Maybe I don't have to hire a second person as quickly because that one person can be more effective and can do more with using AI as a tool. I see it no different than an electric screwdriver versus, a regular screwdriver, or using an electric saw, or any of those, how that's a force multiplier to be able to build things faster because I have, tools to do that. This is just another tool if used correctly.
Exactly. Because when you think about, when they're updating or when they're building a new line, right, the engineers involved, and that's where you have all that power going in. Once it's delivered, you might just have a technician. And so if all that during the construction, the as-built and all the documentation were there and enables that AI to assist that technician to be able to identify these problems before they become something that shuts the line down, that's where I see that benefit, because you're right. The engineers are not going to be there all the time.
Yes. And even if they are there, again, they have so much going on, as we know, right? Making it easier. There's no different than why we started doing all of this automation. A long time ago, all this stuff was hardwired, right? It was 4 to 20 milliamp. We run wires directly to the endpoint, all those things. Why did we start using Ethernet? It wasn't because it was necessarily better. It was just easier and faster, right? We could do so much more by putting it on this backbone. So then everything started having an IP address and started being Ethernet connected. And then again, back in the day, everything was proprietary. You went to Schneider and they had or Foxborough or Emerson or GE. It was all in-house custom computers and custom OS. And then they're like, man, this is a lot of time to keep up with and patch and all the things. Then they just started grabbing Microsoft Windows or Linux or Sun Microsystems or whatever, because it was a lot easier for them to just add an application on top of a platform than it was to maintain the entire platform, the hardware, the software, the firmware. So we started just bolting these things on. And we did the same thing with networks. We added firewalls. We added all of this stuff has just been added on. AI is going to be the same way. So let's learn from our mistakes from those times where we didn't think about security and what the impacts were. Let's make sure we're putting that stuff in and designing a secure process from the beginning, instead of, waiting until something bad happens and then having to react to it and try to do takedowns or respond because a plant went down, or because I've got this AI process that's running wild and rampant and I need it to stop because it continues to turn things off I don't want to, or turn things on that I don't want it to, or whatever action it's doing that I don't like.
Yes, I love that at design. Whenever you can get things at design, then I don't have to bring a cybersecurity tool to kind of prod, examine, and then make a best educated guess. Does this look like this signature? Maybe I should block this.
Right.
So whenever I can get anything at design, it's huge. And really, when you look at that automation and those standards, you really want to get your hands onto them and see how much you can influence. And now with AI entering into automation space at velocity, it's a little easier, because you, instead of coming in as a cybersecurity block, you now come in under the guise of making sure you're AI ready on this particular system.
Yeah, 100%. Right. And, I just got back from RSA, where, in San Francisco, and every conference that you go to now, every product has AI. AI this, AI that, we're AIing this. And it's almost like the IoT thing, 5-10 years ago with, you can IoT. I literally this week or last week, our toaster so I've been married going on 18 years, and Carrie and I got a toaster for one of our wedding gifts when we got married. And that toaster is kind of on the fritz. So I'm like, okay, well, it's time to buy a toaster. A toaster's not usually all that expensive. It's not all that, it's just got heating coils and a switch and, a setting of how long, which is basically just a timer. So I started looking for toaster on Amazon, right? And most of them that it showed me had a big display and touchscreen display on the front of the toaster. I'm like, I don't want that, because that's just going to break. Some of them were Wi-Fi or Bluetooth enabled. I'm like, no, I just want a toaster. You put bread in it and you push it down.
Agreed.
It's not that hard. I don't want to do all of that.
Yes. And have you seen those small makers who are now making dishwashers and washing machines with no circuit boards? They're going back to the basics. And I'll tell you, I made a mistake with my first house. I had purchased my first house from the builder. He was an architect, and he had an AC and a furnace in there that was very, very old school. But you could get parts for it.
Right.
In fact, not only could you get parts for it, but you didn't need to use a certain branded part. As long as you can get those connected within certain parameters, you could always keep that thing running. Unfortunately, I modernized it, and then every 5 to 7 years, I have to replace it now.
Yep.
Where that thing was going strong for 30 years.
Yep. 100%. Even like refrigerators. Like used to, you bought a refrigerator and you didn't need another one forever. Like a washer dryer, same way. Like I have a washer dryer and like the motherboard went out on it. And I called the manufacturer and yeah, we don't make that part anymore. You can't buy on the secondary market. Like they literally build obsolescence into their products so that you have to buy a new one. As you say that, I literally saw this morning on, I can't remember where I saw it. Maybe an Instagram or something, where a guy was sharing that he's really excited that somebody is releasing, like through the Kickfunder or whatever, one of those where you crowdfund Kickstarter. There you go. They were building and releasing a complete open source printer. So it is, all of the parts are serviceable. Like it uses HP cartridges just because they're universal and they're so common. But you can refill the ink, you can replace the gears, you can replace all the parts. It uses the cups printer drivers, so it'll work universally with everything. You can mount it on the wall. It can use rolls of paper, or it can use sheets of paper that are already cut. It can be color. It can be black and white only. You can use it as a plotter. Like all of this, so you can take it. It can be a normal print size, or you can turn it into a plotter because it's completely customizable and it's a similar price point. Maybe it's a little bit more, but I just bought a new printer not too long ago because this $500 monstrosity that I had for years just stopped working. I have no idea why. And I can't fix it. Like there's no, I think the network card went out in it, but it's not serviceable, right? So I had to buy a whole new printer. So I ended up just buying a cheap one from Walmart, which, is $50 or whatever. But, they immediately, it has enough ink in it, I think, to print like 5 pieces of paper. And then it's like, hey, you got to buy ink now. And that's where they get you, because they want you to spend, the ink cartridges or refills are twice as much as the dang printer is.
I feel like all the industries are just going for reoccurring revenues and they're trying to drive it. How fast can we get that reoccurring revenue to happen,
So what do you see coming up over the horizon? I know we talked about a lot of scary and fun things, but, next year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever, what do you see? One thing that's scary, one thing that's exciting that you see coming up over the horizon?
Well, one and the same,
Yeah.
AI is both
Yeah.
scary and is going to be an incredible opportunity. So if we just think about the opportunity first, it's like now, I believe when you start building out automation lines in any of the industries, you'll probably now have like near built-in predictive maintenance, near built-in, all of those bonuses that used to be add-ons and separate products from different vendors. You'll now be able to really kind of integrate into just the controls that you have today. Maybe an additional sensor here and there if you want to dedicate something towards predictive maintenance. But that's where I see the opportunity is huge, in that we're going to get more for what we do. Unfortunately, getting more for what we do is just going to also, for the cyber side, make it more difficult to detect what is normal and what's an anomaly that I need to look into.
Sure. Yeah. And I think you're right. I think that's going to be the differentiation, is you're going to be less dependent on the right product or whatever, because you're going to be able to use AI to help you with this more so. It doesn't mean that products aren't going to matter, because they definitely are, but you're going to be able to approach it differently. So I'm excited about it too. Again, I know it's also concerning because if you don't do it right, it can absolutely be dangerous and scary. But I don't fear the change. I'm excited for it, excited to see what's coming. I'm excited to see how we grow and how we more protect these things and get more data and more capabilities out of them. And we're more efficient and capable, because it's not just a cyber thing. Like we're going to be able to use this to make our processes better and be faster and respond quicker and have more capabilities, because we don't have to necessarily go have a vendor to create a capability for us. We can say, hey, we need this. To me, it seems it's almost like a spreadsheet. Like used to, I would put something in a spreadsheet, and if you're really good at it, you could put formulas and there's all this stuff. You could get data feeds from it, and you have this really fancy, robust spreadsheet. I really see AI as really kind of filling the void for that. Is I don't need a spreadsheet anymore. I'm going to turn it over to AI, and it's going to be a more pretty visual dashboard. It's going to have more integrations and APIs, and we can lock it down. And like, again, if you do it correctly, it can be really powerful. But we've obviously got to be careful with how we do it and design it in the beginning with security and risk in mind.
Right. Having all that in place is just, it should be mandatory, right? They should have those prompts already pre-made and shared with all the engineers to be able to execute on those.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Well, awesome, man. Thanks for digging in. Man, it's always interesting to talk through some of these things and get other people's perspectives. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for taking the time and being on here. I can't believe it's been the first time you've been on the podcast. So thank you for your time, sir. I really appreciate it. And it's always great talking with you.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Oh my gosh, we could talk for hours when we talk shop.
I know.
This is awful. Cool.
Hopefully we'll just record it next time we're having dumplings or whatever, right?
Exactly right. Thank you, Aaron. See you.
Thanks for joining us on Protect It All, where we explore the crossroads of IT and OT cybersecurity. Remember to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to stay ahead in this ever-evolving field. Until next time.